What if a virus you caught while pregnant could affect your child's brain decades later? What if something as ordinary as the flu, or as hidden as a parasite from your pet cat, could tilt the odds towards schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or autism? My name is Lane, and this is my YouTube channel, and I also have a podcast called Psychiatry Rewritten. I am a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. I was a nurse in the ER for about 6 to 7 years, and then I graduated with my PMHNP. So now I prescribe psychiatric medications to people. But I'm making these videos and talking about these topics because I live and breathe mental health, and I love to learn about interesting mental health topics and to advocate as well. So thank you for being here, and I hope you learned something while you are listening or watching. This isn't science fiction. It's the story of how maternal infections can leave marks on mental health. What if the flu you had while pregnant could whisper through your child's brain decades later? What if something as ordinary as a virus, or even just a fever, could tilt the odds toward schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or autism? Before you panic, this is not a scary story. This is about science, probability, and prevention. It's about the hidden ways biology and environment can collide, and how understanding that can reduce blame and build compassion. I'll be honest, the first time I stumbled on this research, I was pregnant and I was scared. I had a terrible virus in the very first weeks of my pregnancy before I even knew I was pregnant. And once I started reading about maternal infections and mental illness risk, I don't know what even led me there necessarily, but then I read this about schizophrenia and my brain went to the worst case scenario. I was like spiraling on NCBI at 2 a.m. just convinced that I already sentenced her to a life of struggle. Because you know how you can spiral during pregnancy. But what I learned, and what I want everyone to hear that's listening, is science tells us a story of risk, not fate. And risk, when understood, becomes an opportunity for prevention, awareness, and compassion. So, how did researchers even figure this out? The first real clue came from the 1957 influenza pandemic. Because decades later, scientists noticed that people born during or just after the outbreak were more likely to develop schizophrenia as adults. Not everyone. Not even close to everyone, but enough of a statistical signal that it couldn't be ignored. Then came the 1964 rubella epidemic, also known as German measles. Mothers who were infected in the first trimester gave birth to children who were not only at higher risk of intellectual disability and autism, but also schizophrenia later in life. That was one of the first times doctors started to look around and say, wait a second, mental illness might not start in adolescence or adulthood. It might actually start before birth. Imagine being born in 1965 before vaccines were common. Your risk of schizophrenia wasn't just about your genes or how you were raised. It could also depend on whether your mom had rubella during pregnancy. But that changes the way we think about the origins of mental health entirely. Researchers tracked children who were in the womb during that influenza pandemic outbreak and compared them to kids born just before or after. What they found was striking. Those exposed in utero had about a 2 to 3-fold higher risk of developing schizophrenia later in life. So, to put that in perspective, the regular lifetime risk of schizophrenia in the general population is about 1%. But in these groups exposed to the flu during the second trimester, the risk jumped closer to 2 to 3%. And that might not sound huge at first, but when you scale that across thousands of millions of births during a pandemic, it's actually a significant bump. The next big clue came from the 1964 rubella pandemic, which is also known as the German measles. And German measles, or rubella, is now vaccine preventable. If you vaccinate your children, you should be good. But back then, it swept through communities. Studies later found that up to 20% of children exposed in utero had serious neurological or psychiatric outcomes. Many were born with intellectual disabilities, disadvantages, vision and hearing problems, and much higher rates of autism and schizophrenia. One chilling number that I read, in the U.S. rubella epidemic of the 60s, there were about 30,000 children born with congenital rubella syndrome. Follow-up studies showed that their risk of schizophrenia was 10 to 15 times higher than average. So what these numbers told scientists was clear. Mental illness wasn't just a matter of bad genes or a bad environment, like bad parenting. It could be influenced by something as simple as, or as random as, catching a virus while pregnant. So this implication was huge for scientists, for psychiatry, for the field. It reframed schizophrenia and other psychiatric conditions not just as brain disorders that appear in young adulthood or lay dormant, but as neurodevelopmental disorders, conditions with roots going all the way back to pregnancy. In 1944, it wasn't just viruses. During World War II, Nazi blockades cut off food to parts of the Netherlands. Pregnant women survived on as little as 400 to 800 calories a day. Their babies grew up in a very different world. And decades later, those who were in utero during the famine had twice the risk of schizophrenia. This showed that infections weren't the only prenatal threat. Anything that triggered stress, malnutrition, or inflammation during pregnancy could change how the brain developed. Around the same time, scientists started noticing something else. People exposed to toxoplasmosis, which is a parasite often caught from cats or undercooked meat. You can get it from when you change the litter box. That's why they tell pregnant women not to change your litter box. also seem to have higher schizophrenia rates. Later studies confirmed that maternal exposure during pregnancy Later studies confirmed that maternal exposure during pregnancy may raise the child's risk. Other culprits emerged too, like herpes simplex virus, urinary tract infections, even maternal fevers with no clear source. The pattern was the same. When the mother's body launched an immune response, the baby's developing brain was affected. One by one, these historical events started to form a pattern for researchers and scientists. Mental illness wasn't just about adolescence gone wrong or bad families or chemical imbalance or even the seasons or the time of the year that people are born, because that's another. It was increasingly clear that psychiatric disorders are neurodevelopmental disorders. And the roots of these disorders can reach all the way back to pregnancy, shaped by infections, viruses, nutrition. So here's the million-dollar question. How does a virus in mom turn into a mental health risk for a baby years later? The answer isn't the virus itself. Most of the time, the baby isn't infected at all. The culprit is the immune response, what scientists call maternal immune activation, or MIA. So basically, when you get sick, your immune system pumps out chemical messengers, chemical signals called cytokines. And these are basically, think about like text messages telling your body, sending a message to your body to fight the infection, to raise the temperature, to create a fever, to call in the white blood cells, and to make you tired so you'll rest. And it's perfect for survival, but in pregnancy, cytokines can cross the placenta, and the fetal brain, which is still wiring itself together, is exceptionally sensitive to those signals. Think of the fetal brain like a construction site. Neurons are migrating into place. Connections are being laid like electrical wiring, and scaffolding is everywhere. If you suddenly blast that construction site with a chaotic storm of chemical signals, some of the blueprint could get messed up. Wiring goes off course and rooms get built in the wrong place. Another key player in this, brain's immune cells. They're like these large, kind of weird shaped cells in the brain. And in a developing brain, might act like gardeners. They prune the extra connections, keeping inflammation in check and guiding neurons kind of to their right place. When a mother's immune system is activated, those can go into overdrive. Instead of pruning carefully, they may strip away too much or not enough, but there's no middle ground. That leaves the brain with wiring that's either tangled or overgrown, both of which can set the stage for psychiatric symptoms later in life. What's fascinating and sobering is that the timing of the infection matters. If it happens in the first trimester, when the neural tube and early structures are forming, it may disrupt the basic blueprint. If it happens in the second trimester, when neurons are moving and migrating and the synapses are forming, it may alter the wiring patterns instead. And then in the third trimester, if the mother gets an infection, this could influence processes like myelination or fine-tuning connections. That's why different viruses, different infections in different trimesters seem linked to slightly different outcomes. Autism in one study, schizophrenia in another, sometimes bipolar disorder. It seems like it depends when the storm hits the construction site and what phase of the building. Now, here's the crucial part, though. This isn't fate. Again, this isn't destiny. Most kids exposed to maternal infections do not develop mental illness. What it does raise is the odds. For example, if the baseline schizophrenia risk is 1%, a significant maternal infection might raise it to 2 or 3%. That's a big deal at the population level, but for any one family, it's still overwhelmingly likely the child will not develop schizophrenia. So the takeaway isn't fear, it's understanding. These immune pathways are one piece of a much larger puzzle. Genes, environment, trauma, stress, resilience, all layered together. And if anything, the science actually helps reduce blame. Because for decades, mothers were told their child's schizophrenia or autism was their fault. That it was bad parenting or refrigerator mothers or family dysfunction. What this research shows is that mental illness is not about blame. It's about biology intersecting with circumstance. Okay, so we've talked about the flu and rubella, German measles, but here's where it gets even more interesting. It's not just those famous viruses. A whole range of infections, and even like I said, just fevers, have been linked to later mental health risks. You've probably heard of toxoplasmosis, the parasite you can catch from cat litter or undercooked meat. For years, it was mostly talked about in pregnancy as a risk for vision and hearing problems in newborns, and that's where I first heard about it, was in nursing school. But researchers started noticing something strange. People exposed to toxoplasma during pregnancy also seemed to have a higher risk of schizophrenia in adulthood. One study found that individuals with schizophrenia were 2 to 3 times more likely to have been exposed to toxoplasma compared to controls. And in animal studies, toxoplasma exposure changes dopamine signaling in the brain. The same pathway involved in psychosis, schizophrenia. So yes, the crazy cat lady stereotype, it's an oversimplification, but it came from somewhere. Another unexpected player to this is herpes simplex virus type 2, which is the one that usually causes genital herpes. Several studies have found that if a mother has a reactivation of herpes simplex virus type 2 during pregnancy, the child's risk of developing schizophrenia is significantly higher. Again, not because the baby is infected, but because the immune system in the mother is activated during this time, releasing the cytokines. It's not just viruses and parasites either. Even bacterial infections during pregnancy, like urinary tract infections, have been linked to increased psychiatric risk as well. A large Danish cohort study showed that maternal bacterial infections were associated with a 60% increase in the odds of schizophrenia in babies and their offspring. That finding floored researchers because UTIs are so common in pregnancy. It suggests the key factor isn't the specific germ, but the inflammation and immune activation that follows once again. And it might not even matter what causes the immune response, honestly. Fever itself during pregnancy has been tied to developmental changes. In one study, mothers who reported having fevers in the second trimester had children with about 2 to 3 times higher odds of autism spectrum disorder. And again, that doesn't mean every fever is dangerous because most pregnancies with fevers end up totally fine. And you have to remember that the fever is your body fighting off infection. So it's a good thing you need a fever to fight infection. But it shows how sensitive the fetal brain is to inflammatory signals, no matter what the source is. So the pattern repeats. It's not one virus, one parasite, or one infection, or one bacteria. It's the maternal immune response, the MIA. Any significant immune system activation, whether from the flu, from German measles, from toxoplasma, herpes, UTIs, or even just has the potential to ripple into brain development. Or even just an idiopathic fever has the potential to ripple into brain development and can affect it. And again, we have to emphasize though that this is about probabilities, not fate. Most kids exposed to these things grow up without schizophrenia or autism. But the risks are real enough that they've reshaped how scientists think about the origins of mental illness. And it matters because it reinforces what many of us already know, but don't always act on. That maternal health is foundational. Taking care of pregnant women isn't just about avoiding catastrophe during labor or preventing low birth weight. It's also about protecting their overall health, their immune system, nutrition, cortisol levels, stress levels, their immune system response. Because those things don't only shape the mother's well-being, they shape the baby's brain and the baby's well-being into the future. And what this research shows is that the maternal health reaches even further than we ever thought before. It doesn't just affect whether a baby is born healthy or not. It affects so many other things. It may influence whether that child grows up healthy or at a higher or lower risk for things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, autism, and that's huge. It means that caring for pregnant women is one of the most powerful public mental health interventions we have. And yes, stress in pregnancy matters, lack of sleep, they can all add up. So if that, man, is stressing you out. I'm just kidding. So we've been talking about infections, but they're not the only factor. Mental illness risk in the womb follows a bigger pattern. When a pregnant body is under stress, whether from viruses, starvation, toxins, or trauma, the developing brain feels it too. And it gets even deeper than that, because these prenatal stressors don't just shape development in the moment. They can leave epigenetic marks, chemical changes that turn genes on or off without altering the DNA itself. Think of it as a sticky note on the genome. Respond to stress this way, or make more dopamine receptors here. And those marks can last a lifetime. Some researchers even suggest they can echo into future generations. Perhaps they do alter DNA, which means your grandmother's stress, malnutrition, or infection during pregnancy may have nudged your biology too. So when we talk about maternal infections, it's not an isolated story. It's part of a bigger truth. Maternal health is public mental health. Nutrition, infection control, stress management, clean environments, and access to care. They all protect not just mothers, but the mental health of future generations, future families. We've covered a lot of science, but I want to pause and talk about the more human side, because when you hear research like this, it's easy to start spiraling in your head, even if someone's telling you not to. People living with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or autism, this story matters to them too. It doesn't erase lived experiences or lived struggles, but it offers a new narrative that these conditions aren't signs of weakness or moral failing or broken families or bad parenting or bad behavior or bad childhood. They are part of a bigger human story, one where biology, circumstance, timing, and resilience all collide. And it shifts how we think about mental illness. Because for too long, conditions like the ones I mentioned have been framed as mysterious brain problems that suddenly show up in adolescence or in your early 20s or early 30s. But the truth is, they're often neurodevelopmental conditions with roots that reach all the way back into pregnancy, when that person was a fetus, or even to their grandmother and her stress level before they were even alive. And that doesn't mean we throw up our hands in fear. It means we take our maternal health seriously, not just as obstetrics, but as public mental health. Access to prenatal care, vaccines, nutrition, infection treatment, stress reduction, just healthcare in general. Those aren't just about healthier pregnancy, they're about healthier generations and just healthier individuals, healthier families. And it means we stop blaming parents and mothers, because no mother can control every germ, every stressor, or every twist of fate. So what this research shows is that mental illness is not the product of cold parenting or individual weakness. It's biology intersecting with circumstance. That perspective doesn't scare me, it makes me hopeful. Because if biology and circumstance matter, then so does intervention, prevention, and compassion. I just think that caring for pregnant women is one of the most powerful psychiatric interventions we have. And that's the lens that I want you to walk away with. Mental illness isn't born in isolation. It can begin before birth, in the hidden conversation between a mother's immune system and her child's developing brain. Understanding that doesn't make the story scarier. It just makes it deeper. It makes it more complex and intricate and layered. It takes some of the weight of blame off of families and parents who have already dealt with this, and it expands the horizon of what prevention and compassion in psychiatry can look like, and in women's health. Because none of us chooses the circumstances we inherit, but all of us can choose what we do with that knowledge, and the knowledge that we choose to immerse ourselves in and learn about. So that's all for today. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you for the next video. Bye.